Hello, and welcome to today's session on how to get the most value from your existing software systems. I'm JP Lassard. Be sure to check out the other videos in this series with myself and my colleague, John Horner. Today, we're going to talk about how to improve your current software without replacing it through modernization and compatibility. Now, I'm not going to talk about upgrading today. That's different, and that's going to be in a different video series. Be sure to check that out if you're interested in upgrading. Today, I'm focusing mostly on modernization based on compatibility. So let's start with an analogy. Let's talk about software versus tractors. Now, I'm not talking about who would win in a fight between software and tractors, because the answer is obviously software, but let's talk about the evolution and how it's evolved and why it's evolved and the speed of evolution. So this picture represents about 100 years of evolution of the tractor, okay? And it's evolved very different for the 100 years that it's evolved from that to that. It's gotten better and in fairly linear fashion. So it's gone up, there've been technological advances, etc. The biggest thing to consider though is the field and the ground that these things are working on has stayed the same in those 100 years, okay? It's working on the same ground, it's doing the same job. Software, however, is different. This grid from StatCounter shows you a period of just 5 years. And this is when mobile browsing overtook laptop and desktop browsing. So this is the 5-year period where we went from almost nothing to overtaking it. And that's just from 2012 to 2017. So by the way, if you're watching this today and you're already not mobile friendly, you're behind the curve by a lot. So think about that. But this is how fast technology changes. And this is the ground shifting under your feet. This is the field on which your software is playing. And it's changing that fast. This isn't 100 years, this is 5 years. And it's completely flipped, right? So think about how fast technology changes versus a lot of other things in our world. So you want to think about modernization just to keep up with the changing ground. So let's talk about what are some triggers for modernization. What are some things that would say that, okay, it's time to think about modernizing my software? Number one is incompatibility. So new operating systems are coming out, new devices are coming out, and your software won't run on them, okay? Especially if you can't control the audience and what they're using. So if you've got 10 people in your office and you say, okay, we're just not upgrading our operating system so we can keep using our software. Great, you can control that. But you can't always control what your customers are using and what the people out there in the rest of the world are using. So in those cases, incompatibility is pretty important. New operating system, new browser, whatever comes out, you want to be sure your software runs on it. Number two, sunset of support. So this means that your software is so old that they're not going to be officially supporting it anymore. No more patches, no more support, etc. Now in this case, I would say you probably want to consider upgrading significantly. But you could also modernize certain aspects of it if they're going to sunset support, just to get some pieces of it to be more modern. Number three is risk mitigation. So most likely, if you're still running the same version of your software that you have been for years, there could be some security vulnerabilities on there. So want to modernize it, patch it, get it more up to date so that you can get rid of some of those vulnerabilities and potentially mitigate some of the risk. Also think about things like compliance. You may be required to be compatible with certain aspects in certain browsers and operating systems. So think about that. Finally, opportunity. So as new devices and as the ground changes in technology, there's new opportunities to leverage that new technology. If your software can't take advantage of some of the newest things that are coming out in the world of technology, you may want to modernize certain aspects so you can take advantage of those and get more value from your existing software. Okay, so now you've looked at it, you have one of those triggers in your head, it's time to modernize my software. What are the things that you should consider? What are the options that you got? So what I would say your main decision here is modernize versus upgrade versus rebuild. And we're going to talk about upgrade and rebuild in other videos, okay? So focus on the modernization. Why would I modernize versus doing either of those other two things? Well, it's got to be that the cost of modernization plus the value that you're going to get from it over time is greater than whatever opportunity and value you have for doing a rebuild or an upgrade. Because I'll tell you that the most value and the most opportunity you're going to gain is through a complete rebuild or replacement of the system. The second most is through an upgrade, and most likely the least is through modernization. But you can, if you can get another 3 to 5 years out of modernizing something, and then you're going to get that much value out of it, then do it. So think about those things in those terms, and can I stretch the value of this software I've got today by modernizing it without investing quite as much just yet? Then you want to modernize. Think about the usage scenarios. When I talk about usage scenarios, I'm saying who, what, where, and how. okay? And I'll give you 3 examples to kind of drive that home. Number 1, think about a customer. I want them to be able to place orders. I want them to be able to do it from their backyard, and I want them to be able to do it with their mobile device, okay? That's answering the usage scenario. Now that's most likely something you want to consider modernizing if you don't support that. Number 2, I want my field staff to be able to post service order completion. I want them to be able to do it from the customer location, not when they get back to the office. And I want them to be able to use the rugged tablets that they've got out in the field with them. Okay, that's another usage scenario. The third one is I want my accounting staff to process invoices, and they're going to do it in the office using their workstation. All right, so you can see those 3 things. If your software doesn't support those, most likely one of the first 2, it may not today, that's where you want to consider applying modernization. You may not need to apply it to that 3rd example, right? That's perfectly fine. You could run that way for a long time very successfully. So you don't need to modernize there. So what I would encourage you to consider is a hybrid approach. So you can keep your core system to run all the accounting functions and all of those things in your back office functions. You could probably run perfectly fine on that and stretch that value of that software, and then create some integrated solutions. Things like the first 2 scenarios, mobile app or web portal, can accomplish those things that I mentioned in the first 2 scenarios, and then you can integrate those with your core system. Even if you're still running on something like a mainframe from 20, 30 years ago, you can create new modern solutions that integrate with that core system, and you can still give a nice modern experience to your customers or field staff or anybody else that needs to use your software. So consider that approach as you're going through it. Now that you know all those things, I would say go out, modernize your software, make it better, or if you're excited about the tractor picture, go buy yourself a new tractor. Until next time, thank you. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or there's any way we can help.